But in that multiple offer, counter offer type environment, what is the value that we're adding? What help are we providing? We're simply saying to the seller, hey, we're going to do this thing that says highest and best. As a result of that saying highest and best, whatever they come back with is going to be the highest and best.
Yeah.
Which is total shit.
Yes.
It's just not true, right? Because I know, first and foremost, and you know where I live, I would have paid 15 grand more for the house I live in. I just didn't need to.
Yep. But also given the opportunity to actually see what the others were paying, you would have paid more than 15 grand.
That's the need, right? I didn't need to because it wasn't a multiple offer situation. I didn't need to because I didn't see my other interest. I didn't know or establish what those goalposts were. I just knew what I needed to do to purchase.
Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Rethink Real Estate, another episode. And on this episode, we are welcoming back the prodigal son himself, Mr. Jason Scott. Jason is the regional director and director of Harcourts Auctions in North America. Every single auction that we do goes through his hands, and it's wonderful to have him back on. There was a time that Jason and I did the podcast together with every episode, but Jason's back on. And on this episode, we are talking about a few different crucial elements to auction. First of all is the service standard of which the auction team and the role that they play throughout the entire process, and the pendulum swing of what that can be, the lack of involvement or having too much involvement, which then is the catalyst to success. We talk about the emotional hats that the agent has to wear. We speak about the crucial elements of an auction transaction and what the core fundamentals of that look like. And what I mean is that we look at both the skill set to receive offers prior to auction and the skill set to hold that interest to auction day. We dive into a lot of philosophy, as Jason's got some ripping metaphors, as he usually does when he comes to the real estate side of things. So looking forward to you going through the episode. Jace, one of the original five from a Harcourts Auction standpoint, making up myself, Callista, Shannon, Mitch, yourself. Not in chronological order, of course. I think it was actually me, Callista, Mitch, Shannon, and you were the original five of Harcourts Auctions. Jason started as a procurement officer within Harcourts Queensland over in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia, then proceeded down to front things up in Melbourne, which is undoubtedly, I believe, the auction capital of the world. Jace, thoughts?
Oh, in terms of auction volume, definitely. I think it was, a few decades ago, considered to be where the best auctioneers or the best auction businesses were run. I think Sydney's overtaken that. New Zealand's overtaken that in the last,
North America. Yeah.
North America. We'll get there. You're sticking with Australasia. But yeah, that was definitely a big step up in terms of volume market, how that market moves, what the expectations were going from Brisbane, which is a little bit of a slower market in terms of turnover versus that of Melbourne for sure.
Then, Jace, you went back to the roots of Canberra, and my affection for Canberra or lack thereof. But then decided that the US was the place to come. I've said this to Jason before, actually just a few minutes ago, to be honest. Is that it was one of the easiest recruitment conversations that I'd ever have. Is that, oh, look, I just really don't like what I'm doing here. No worries. Why don't you come to the US and give this a shot? Yeah, all right. That sounds good. I'm sure that the conversation was way more intricate with Lara, Jason's better half, but all in all,
I think they were both pretty straightforward and very, very short conversations. I don't know which one of us was fishing the most, to be honest, but it worked out well.
Well, I think that we go with our gut, don't we, mate? Go with our gut.
That's the best thing to go with.
That's it. So, mate, one of the things that obviously you came over here and were really one of our first sort of people on the ground in North America, where sort of we were going to hand over the reins from Callista and I working in the business on a daily basis to then working on the business. So then you've taken those reins and you are the director of auctions for Harcourts North America. Any auction that we do, you oversee from a higher level perspective, and then organize auction day and all of those different parts of the real estate transaction that ultimately we emphasize with the auction process. So I guess that there's no better person to talk to about a few different things today. The first thing that I wanted to talk to you about, Jace, was the service of which the auction process is based around. Some people say the service being the service that we give to the listing agents and effectively becoming that third party involved in the process. But secondarily to that is that, it's not only the service element, it is the process of which has been built, and the effectiveness of that process is so reliant on all the steps being taken in order to get an effective outcome. You touched on this in a training session that I've heard you done previously, that we're either too involved or we are either involved not enough, and both of those can affect the success of the transaction. Where do you stand on the service element and the process element of auction and every little intricacy being done?
Yeah, well, I think that the auction platform provides a really, really solid framework in order to better ensure an outcome and a more successful outcome of sale or result or exposure and offers and interest coming through a property. And if we're not involved, or if that framework is fractured in any way, or if the agent is too detached and then we have to step in any more than that, the pathway that we take with a seller becomes a little bit more attached or detached versus effective in terms of what we're there to sort of be, or the role that we're there to fulfill here in North America in running the auction process. And what I mean by that is...
Yeah, what role is that? What role is that? Do you believe that it's the third party in the transaction that can ultimately remove themselves away from the emotional elements of it? Because that's part of the next part that I want to talk to you about, is that, and jumping around a little bit, is that the agent wears this emotional cap that I believe erodes the effectiveness of their negotiation hat. I think that sometimes the agent, and when I say sometimes, I believe most of the time the good agents get too emotionally attached to the client and the property in order to actually see clearly what the marketplace is saying it and present it to the sellers without offending or without worrying about offense. And is that the best role to describe us, as the person that is the conduit in the middle of all of that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's very easy for an agent, one way or the other, to sort of trip themselves up in that respect with their relationship with the seller. They go on the dream and the journey of trying to achieve a certain outcome in a certain time frame for their seller's certain desire or whatever it might be. And sometimes that can kind of take them away from the effectiveness that they have in how they communicate, or the contradictions that they might make through that campaign of trying to get them the most amount of money, but also trying to educate them on where the market might be and what that market is willing to pay at its absolute premium. And I think that our role can be very, very good and very, very clear at separating those two things and articulating really clearly and really concisely what those facts are, what the black and white of the campaign might mean, and not from a unemotional standpoint, and not from a desensitized standpoint to the seller or to the agent or to that campaign, and why the seller is motivated to sell and why they're going down this path. But sometimes you just can't wear all hats. You can't do everything all the time and be great at every single one of those. And so what we do really well with the framework of the auction process is clearly and concisely articulate and communicate and reiterate what the key points or the indicators or milestones of the campaign are, and are we hitting them and are we not? Do we have the exposure? Do we have the feedback? Do we then have offers? That means we've got leverage. What does that mean in the outcome? And we can actually start to separate what might be a logical mindset of a buyer to an emotional mindset of a buyer, or to a competitive mindset of a buyer. And equally, we can take that emotional mindset of a seller and then put that into a logical place as well. So they kind of switch position in terms of buyer and seller. And that communication is really key in order to do that. And what I find to be a really successful auction campaign is where you have the buyer increase above where we get the seller's expectation to. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the buyers always are paying more money, and doesn't necessarily mean that the sellers are always coming down off their expectation. But when they overlap, when you have a buyer that's in a position to pay money that the seller didn't expect to be on the table, you have a very, very happy and a very, very smooth outcome, very successful outcome when it comes to the sale, the feeling of the sale, the result, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, and the auction team plays a pretty key role in the service element of all of this along the way. And you mentioned before that you can see that pendulum swing of either too involved and not involved. But I guess that the happy medium is us maintaining that involvement the entire way through, but making sure that we don't swing in the direction of being too, or not being involved enough, and not being the emotional support system for the sellers because the agent is too disconnected from the transaction itself. There is that happy medium in the equation. How do you best regulate that from an auction perspective? And if I'm an agent, how do I best regulate knowing that I've got the auction team involved enough?
Yeah, definitely good question. I think first and foremost, it comes down to a bit of a framing of the campaign between us at the auction team and the listing agent in terms of what are our roles, defining those roles, and how comfortable that agent might feel with if it's their first auction campaign, for example, with what the steps of the process exactly are. Are they comfortable to have those conversations, and are we positioning it the right way? You might have an agent that is, in a great way, a very used to controlling their own campaigns and then wanting to remain in control, which is great. We want you to be in control of your campaigns as a listing agent, so long as it is conducive to the right outcome and it's conducive to the right outcome for the process, because otherwise we're just bastardizing the process itself or the result and what we're actually trying to do in the commitment to the seller. Whereas if you have someone that is not engaged as a listing agent, whether that's by their own choice, hey, look, you run it, I'm too busy, I'm doing this, or whatever it might be, or they don't know how, and then they're relying on us to do those things or show them the way, it very much needs to be a showing of the way. We need their voice to be as loud as ours, not our voice to be louder than theirs in some of that operational type aspect. But then the seller and the agent still have that rapport and they still have that relationship and they still have that confidence and comfort with one another that, hey, the listing agent's the right person for the job. It's not just the auction process that's sort of sailing the ship. But auction is allowing us to make sure that our position is right, make sure that everything is going according to plan. That way,
let's just rapid fire some questions off that I think that sort of come to mind within the process here that you've sort of alluded to. Is that let's rapid fire off some of the situations where what's the best time for you to get involved when a seller, like when a seller's wanting, to really stick to the number and the evidence is clearly pointing in the other direction, that we've built on feedback, follow-up, offers, everything, that the seller is, not exactly in line with what that's saying. Is that a conversation that you would have with the seller, letting them know that they're out of alignment, or is that a conversation that the agent would have?
Yeah, definitely a conversation that I would have, there's no doubt, but not necessarily in separation to that agent. I would hope that, and in an ideal campaign, up to that point, the messaging's been really consistent between the auction and also the agent. And importantly, that messaging ultimately comes from the market. So the buyer response needs to be in line with that. The buyer offers, the market feedback, and we're really taking that information and communicating that information the most effective way, or maximizing that information and maximizing what those offers might be. If the seller is then in a position where they're just not in a position to sell or not in a position to listen one way or the other, then definitely some of those conversations or those crucial conversations in terms of the strictness or the toughness of them is certainly best probably for us at Harcourts Auctions to be conducting, not without the agent, but from our direction. Because then if we sever any ties there, it's not done from the position of the listing agent.
It's keeping that relationship intact and keeping that sacred at all times. And I think that that's where, a lot of agents get their nose out of joint when it comes to having somebody else in play. And I think that someone explained it as insecurity, someone's explained it as pride, someone has explained it as ego. We use all of these individual terminologies, and you can frame it whatever way you want. Whichever one is actually most prickly to you, if you're listening, is probably the one that actually is the truth in all of that. However, sorry to interrupt your podcast, but I wanted to make sure that you're aware of the Harcourts Auction business plan that is available to you as a free value add to your business. We released it earlier this year and have had an overwhelming number of people download it, but also an overwhelming amount of feedback that when they put it into action, it's changed the way that they've thought about their business. Not only from a numbers perspective, but also as an inward lead flow to make sure that they're building a repeat and referral business for the future. The main goal of what we're trying to plan for is to remove you from cold prospecting into that repeat and referral natured business that everybody wants. Again, it is available to you on the 16th of January was the episode that you can go back and listen to on podcast or go back and watch through YouTube. But also, if you need to, go to harcourtsauctions.com, click the menu tab, go into the blogs and resources section, and you'll be able to find it under the Harcourts Auctions business plan. Also, you can send me an email, ben.brady@harcourtsauctions.com, and I'd be happy to send it through to you. That said, is that when it comes to that conversation itself, we really need to be the enforcer of making sure that a seller understands the value or the feedback, so to speak, from the marketplace itself, so that therefore the relationship of the listing agent and their client can remain intact and can remain sacred in all ways. But I guess that's the part of it here as well that I think that people underestimate, is that it can be the same person saying the same thing over and over again, and then somebody else comes into the equation, and we have great credibility within all of our team members with the volume of transactions that everybody is involved in to actually say, hey, we sell in excess of several $1 billion worth of real estate every year, and we get to see this everywhere in the country, and this is the situation. And then the sellers might not be very happy with that information. And then the agent can then be the person, once we're removed from that conversation, to then obviously dive into that deeper from their perspective and actually have that conversation. I really do find, Jason, is that when it comes down to any education process, the one problem that I see and where relationships are severed is that if it hasn't been a graduation of the same information over and over again, people try to be too heavy-handed with that information, and they try to just they try to just get the seller to agree or get someone to agree to an individual price at that individual time, rather than understanding that there's no instant gratification when it comes to conversations that are had in such an emotional forum of selling your home. This process needs to be granular all the way through, leading to that end individual equation. And there needs to be a multitude of the same if the seller is going to accept that evidence to have peace of mind.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it's important, whether it's, by the way, auction or traditional here. Auction just makes it a lot easier, and it's easier to track these kind of things. But you then need to have those milestones, so you're being patient, but you're not being passive. You know, it's great to not be too heavy-handed early on. Of course, you know, we haven't extended the marketing. We don't know if the entire market's come through. That's why you and I are great believers of, if you accept an offer in the first sort of 48, 72 hours, then we've undersold the property, because how can you say with confidence the market has seen the home, been through, being able to leverage that? Hence the auction process being great as we work towards that date. But if you're so heavy-handed, you go down that exact same path. If you're too passive, or if you're pulling away from that, or waiting to the last minute without working on those milestones, or if you think of it, if you're in command of a ship, here's some of those analogies. There you go, Ben, just to make you happy. You're in command of like a ship or a sailboat. You've got a tacked course. You've got to just adjust and adjust and adjust to make sure that we're navigating. When I say we, it's not just the Harcourts Auctions business and the listing agent or the agency. It's the seller. We're a selling party. We are the selling unit. We all need to be of the same mindset. We all need to be heading towards the same outcome. We need to be doing regular check-ins in those meetings and those conversations with regards to, are you still motivated to sell? Has anything changed for you? Are we still the best person to negotiate the best price from the best buyer?
It's all of these are questions that, as an agent can be uncomfortable to ask. That it's very easy for us to ask as that third party involved in the situation that is ultimately dealing in the fact. There has to be emotion in the transaction. That's where the agent deals in the emotion of the transaction. They deal with the where it is, what it is, why it is, how beautiful it is, what they've done, and all of those beautiful sale points. We deal in the how much, what are people saying, and all of the actual factual evidence, but it has to be from a consistent basis to then be able to prove a point. But where I'm going, where I want to go with this next, Jace, is that I want to then lead into, parts of the process that you see are the most critical to the success of an auction. Like if you were to break down the number of activities that we would do in an auction leading in, those activities, on an average basis, let's say that a property goes all the way to auction day and we have live bidding on auction day, there would be 100 to 120 steps that we would take. And that steps have to be applied. We even have a checklist within our own system in order to make sure that every single little thing is checked off, because the one little thing that isn't checked off can actually decreases the likelihood of the success of the sale, because we've come up with an algorithm, a formula that has a far better success rate than traditional real estate ever has across a long format relationship and a long format time frame. So if you were to say there was one individual point that if an agent's running an auction, not only having the auction team involved and all of that type of stuff, but what's something that you believe, or one or two things that are the most critical to the success of an auction campaign? What are the big ticket items, the big rocks?
The biggest skill sets, in my opinion, I'm going to take the advantage there and use two instead of one. And that is the ability to extract from the market, no matter the price point, no matter the year, no matter the property type, no matter the seller, offers, preferably plural, but an offer. And then second to that, but in segue, and they have a relationship together, is holding that interest through to auction day. Now, getting offers is a skill set, and in some degree, in my opinion, is controllable with regards to, a lot of agents, I think, are misinformed in terms of how they approach the negotiation or the marketing of a property and how they work with open houses or feedback calls and all those kinds of things in the sense of the questions they ask to get feedback, to get offers. Now, what's feedback? Feedback is price. What's the best form of price? A written offer. And so if we can get offers on the property, then we have something viable, something real, something to show the seller, and then something also to leverage the market. So it goes both ways there.
Give an example of leverage the market.
Leverage the market in the sense of having multiple offers. You might have one offer at $1 million, one offer at $2 million. They don't know where they stand, but we're in a multiple offer situation. So we're now able to go back to the 2 million, let them know that it's not just them. We have someone else. Maybe the terms are better, the contingencies, et cetera, and vice versa for either party. We're able to leverage that negotiation.
Well, let's hone in on that. Let's hone in on that for a second, because in traditional real estate, instead of leveraging that situation to an end date being the auction date itself, and we'll talk about holding buyers through to the auction date and why that's important shortly. But realistically, in a multiple offer situation, traditionally, all you do is simply send out a counter offer, and you've automatically given away your cards from a negotiation standpoint. You don't let the market find its own feet, and ultimately, you've already given away everything in that negotiation that the buyer then can negotiate down from an outcome.
Yeah, and I'll play devil's advocate for you there, Ben, is, okay, well, let's say we counter-offered, but we didn't counter-offer on price or terms. We simply said highest and best.
Yeah.
And what you're doing by doing that is you're just breeding further frustration for the buyer, first and foremost. You're asking for them to get pissed off, and you're asking for the time in the negotiation to extend. Time kills deals in that regard. I know that's contradictory to saying, hey, hold our interest to auction day, but we're talking about a counteroffer situation where we're both saying, hey, both parties want to button this up, so let's talk about it.
Yeah, but there's a reason that we hold it to auction day, which we'll get to about time here shortly.
Yeah, absolutely. But in that multiple offer, counter-offer type environment, what is the value that we're adding? What help are we providing? We're simply saying to the seller, hey, we're going to do this thing that says highest and best. As a result of that saying highest and best, whatever they come back with is going to be the highest and best.
Yeah.
Which is total shit.
Yes.
It's just not true, right? Because I know, first and foremost, and you know where I live, I would have paid 15 grand more for the house I live in. I just didn't need to.
Yep. But also given the opportunity to actually see what the others were paying, you would have paid more than 15 grand.
That's the need, right? I didn't need to because it wasn't a multiple offer situation. I didn't need to because I didn't see my other interest. I didn't know or establish what those goalposts were. I just knew what I needed to do to purchase. But also with a multiple offer situation that's typically highest and best, you're also not disclosing what those goalposts are or what you need to do to purchase. It's still blind. Now, when you have this, you've got a buyer that still wants to be conservative. They might increase. That's great. We might high five at the end of the day and say, oh, I got the buyer up 25 grand, 50 grand. How good are we? Welcome to real estate agents' ego there going, well, that's awesome. But did you get the most amount of money? Now, you confidently cannot say you did.
And that question to be asked in a real estate situation, the question of, well, did you get the most money, is absolutely sacrilegious in a real estate space, because they feel so uncomfortable having to answer that question, because they need to answer the question, well, we got the most money at that individual time from that individual person based on the negotiation circumstances that we created, which the answer to that is categorically always no. Jason, we've had situations where we've taken multiple parties that have been multiply bidding on a property traditionally, and none of them knew what it was, and we've taken them through to auction day, and we're able to get well in excess of what they said their highest and best was. And an agent that says that they got the most money for that property is the most pompous comment that has ever come out of their mouth, because there is absolutely no way, shape or form to guarantee that that is the case in that competitive situation, because it wasn't a live, transparent negotiation where they had the choice to say yes or no to the final number.
But I think it's also important to draw a reference point here to different markets as well, because it's all very well and good for us to say, oh, yeah, that's great in a hot market. Of course, that makes sense. You've got competitive bidding. People are tripping over each other for the property. You know, if you look back to 2021, that was commonplace, right? But the reality is the auction process provides that exact environment even in today's market.
Even with one person.
Even with one person, exactly right. You're creating an atmosphere where it's conducive or it's a pressure point for a buyer to submit their best comfortable price, maybe even their best uncomfortable price. And then you're able to very clearly demonstrate and communicate the efforts, the work, the result of the market, and an underlying point to, if you wish to sell, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, right now, right here today, then this is what we're looking at. Yep. And so it's a really clear and a really comfortable period. It's a really good full stop onto the sentence to say, this is our campaign. This is where we've got to. If you want to sell, this is what it looks like.
Yep.
If we get to auction day, things might change a little bit, good, bad, or otherwise, but we can talk about that. And then if we are looking to accept something today, this is what we're looking at. It's a really clear point.
So the one major skill set that you believe, or the one major point within the equation of a successful auction, is getting offers prior to auction in order, one, to gain feedback, two, to gain an opportunity for the seller to say yes or no in that situation, and also to see where the entire property stands from a pricing point.
You should reach out if you're a listener here and you're an agent. If you go, well, how do you make sure you get offers? You should reach out to us and we can give you an idea of how we do that. Because 98% of all of our properties that go to auction, last year we did 1,600 properties, 98% of those had more than 5 offers prior to auction.
Well, Jace, we'll do an episode on how you get offers. There's no question about that. That'll be an occasion, and it actually has been in previous episodes, how we get offers out prior to auction. But the one other part that you said was the next skill set that needed to be done in order to keep the integrity of the process from a success perspective is taking that interest. If there's not one clear outlying offer that is just so far above everybody else, then taking that interest that you've got and then bringing it to auction day.
I'll even argue, even if you do have the outlier, even if you do sell it prior to auction, or if you do have the outlier that we're considering an offer prior to, or we're handling that conversation perhaps a little bit more delicately, holding that interest as a contingency plan, as a safety net, as backup offers, holding that interest is so vital. And there are different ways, and we want to make sure that the buyer is encouraged, that the buyer is excited about purchasing the property or about the auction. Now, we don't want to give false pretenses or promises around your offer is going to buy this house in 2 weeks' time at auction day. But the reality is that if they're not registered for auction and we go to auction day, they have zero chance of buying it. And if they register for auction day and they see where the other interest is, they have a much better chance of buying the property. And we have a much better chance of them increasing their offer. Now, you and I have seen time and time and time again, and week in and week out, buyers that have said, Jason, do not come to me. I'm not paying you a cent more than my highest offer, which
Absolutely.
is my offer.
I'm not coming to auction.
Buyers in 24 hours. I'm not going to register. You can get stuffed. Now, of course, we have to make a judgment call. If that's the reality,
you can get stuffed. That's a very Australian comment, I think.
I think I've been told that a couple of times.
Really, you can get stuffed? That's strange. You can get stuffed. No, that'd be like absolutely not.
They would be, but
yeah.
The point being is again, is if they see if this is the right house for them, and there's a few ifs here, if it's the right house for them, if they want to buy the property, if they're emotionally attached, they will buy the property, they will pay the money. Now, even if they're not that attached, even if they're an investor or they're looking at it for other purposes than perhaps, a family or whatever it might be, if there are other reasons that are less emotionally engaged, there is still the opportunity in terms of the investment side, the financial side, is being the best property in the best street this year that they could buy versus anything else, et cetera, et cetera. There are certain things there that we can provide opportunity for, which are all very much the case, and also still use that as information for the seller with regards to where the other offer might be or where auction day might get to. If we just discount or discredit that buyer there and then when the offer comes forward, firstly, we expense the seller the opportunity to consider their offer on auction day. Again, whether that position changes or doesn't change, it's still an opportunity for the seller to go, hey, look, I've got another 2 weeks. I haven't been able to improve that position. I'll now take that. Oh, sorry, that buyer's gone because I thought you had got rid of them, and so I just said go away. That's on us. Well, that's where we need to be ready, and we need to say, hey, I'm not sure my seller's quite there yet. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. I'm going to keep working on communicating with my seller, make sure that they're in a position to sell come auction day. There's still going to be a great opportunity for you. Because the worst thing is if we don't do that, the seller says, hey, Jace, if those guys are still interested, I'll sell it to them. And we think, oh, the seller took too long to make their mind up. Well, no, you didn't do your job in providing the opportunity to the buyer, providing the opportunity still in a couple of weeks' time to the seller. It's that patience versus passive type thing again.
And this is where I get pissed off with the industry. It's like, oh well, it's the seller's decision. But did you display the situation?
It is their decision, but it's their decision.
Absolutely.
Hey, not just yesterday, every day.
Every day. But the problem that I face is that, well, it's the seller's decision. Well, did you display it with all of the facts? Did you give them the understanding of the consequences that if they didn't go down this path? Did you give them the understanding of what ultimately the marketplace is like? Did you go through all of the nuances rather than just be a postal worker and send the offer and say, let me know what you think? That is part of this process from a traditional standpoint, that every single day people say a property's worth as much as somebody's willing to pay. No, it's what somebody's willing to accept at that particular time, that particular moment, in that particular circumstance, with that particular seller and particular buyer in that particular house at that particular time. There's too many particulars there for you to actually dive into. And that's the part of this.
One, which is what a buyer's willing to pay in competition. That's what we forget about. Agents go, hey, this is the offer today. It's gone now. Here's the offer tomorrow. What if we had them together? What if we actually had the competition there? If you've got someone at 500 and someone at 550, well, all of a sudden...
Even then, Jace, even then, it doesn't have to be somebody else, as you know well enough, is the fact that even if it is just a leveraged auction date itself, that buyer doesn't know that there might not be anybody else registered to bid on the auction day itself. But you keep saying to them, well, guys, try and stop the auction. Otherwise, you're going to auction day along with anybody else that is interested in the property.
Yep.
It's just a dot point in order to give us more leverage across the board. And the unfortunate part about it is that agents believe they can create their own leverage without an auction process when it just simply isn't the case. And that's the hysterical thing for me, is that it's just like when we speak to agents, they say, oh, auction's wonderful because it gives us a point of difference in a listing presentation. But it's not only that. It is ultimately gives you purpose in a negotiation to have some infrastructure the way that works.
If you get good auction or traditional, by the way, just again, auction's easier, it provides a better framework. But if you're an agent and you get good at getting offers and you get good at holding that interest, your business is going to change.
Regardless of whether it's auction, like you said.
Your business is going to 2x like that. If you can make sure you get offers on each campaign and make sure you hold that interest, work on the seller, communication's key, all that stuff. But if you've got the offers and you can hold on to it, your life is that much easier. The opportunity for growth in your business is that much easier. The opportunity for further sellers to come through your campaigns, to hear about it, for buyers to come through, for you to help buyers, et cetera, et cetera. Your business changes like that. Your list to sale ratio changes like that. Your days on market change like that.
The instant gratification of this business, mate, is the unfortunate part that what you're saying will probably be in effect by 3% of the people that actually listen to this. And that's the unfortunate part about this, is because instant gratification chews away at the fact that they don't want to hold up somebody because they don't believe that they will wait in order to make sure that it is the best price out there. Because if you ask an agent a question, did you get the best money for the property? It is a taboo question within our industry because they don't want to answer that because they know the answer to it. They got the best at that individual time because they wanted to wrap it up, and ultimately that's what the seller would take at that time. But again, as you pointed out very clearly in today's podcast, is the fact that, yes, a property's worth as much as a buyer's willing to pay, but was that buyer in competition? Because that was not the essence of what they were going to pay unless they felt like they had to pay more in that position, unless they felt like there was some competition. I've just seen too many times that buyers have not been pushed to their furthest limit in order to buy that property. And people might say, well, that's unfair to the buyer. But if you're ever selling a home, or that buyer's ever selling a home, they will do the same thing over and over.
See, but I disagree. I think what's unfair to a buyer is if we as the listing agent rely on their agent being the buyer's agent just to communicate within us, who are not the decision makers. The two agents are not the decision makers. The seller's the decision maker, the buyer's the decision maker. And instead, the listing agent controls how we navigate the campaign, and the buyer's agent controls what they think their buyer is going to want to do.
Yeah.
Now, if we just take at face value those two things, deals don't come together. For example, how many times have we heard from buyer's agents, hey, look, my client's, not interested in doing this. My client's not interested in it. My client's only got a budget up to this point. My client, look, just give me a quick answer. No, my client's out, whatever. And then the polar opposite thing happens. And I'm not saying that's all the time, but the polar opposite things happens because...
Would be pretty close to all the time.
they go back to actually speak to their client and say, hey, look, here's how the environment's unfolding in the purchase negotiation. This is what's going on. They do have some other interests. The auction's only a week or so away. They have asked us again to register. I know we were talking about not doing that, but if you want to be interested, this is your offer. You could still represent your offer, etc. All of a sudden, they do those other things. So it's just about making sure the communication and not giving up. Take all that stuff as white noise. Take it at face value. I don't discredit the buyer's agent by any stretch, but I also don't listen so much to some of those excuses of why they need things done in their timeline. Because at the end of the day, I'm running a campaign in my seller's timeline, not their timeline. I could care less.
Yeah, no, it's funny how you can go back to them a lot of the time and a buyer will say yes and the agent will be shocked that they did say yes because they've automatically made an assumption. It's just like price point. Buyers agents make assumptions based on the budget that the buyer gave them, and then you take them to an auction that might be at a particular starting bid price and is at a certain price point, and then the agent is absolutely shocked what they paid on auction day within competition and never thought that they would pay that much for a property, and they hadn't shown them anything even close to that price range. Essentially, I feel sorry for the buyer having that agent that has made assumptions based on their price point or based on their budget, that they've only showed them a certain style of house. And then the auction process comes around. Of course, they're going to be more emotionally connected to a property that is at a bidding to start from price within their price point that ultimately is worth more money. It's the only property they've actually ever seen at that price point. So therefore, it represents incredible value. And then all of a sudden, they're at that price point on the day of auction and the buyer's agent is shocked. How common is that, Jace? That is just a occurrence. Every single auction event that we have, that is an occurrence. And it just shows the defect of that traditional element of real estate of people making assumptions of what others are going to do.
Yeah, people don't go shopping for real estate or make an offer on the property if they don't want to buy it. So we just need to help them understand what they need to do it in a really straightforward manner and let them know that we're here to help them buy the house. Equally, by doing so, we're letting the seller know where the market is and we're letting them know that we're helping them try to sell the house. It's a really, you and I know this, mate, it's a really straightforward game. This real estate industry, in terms of a business, is a matter of habit, good habit, and rinse and repeat, and being dynamic in how you approach that instead of being one-dimensional. Counter offers are one-dimensional. How we think about a buyer's position or a seller's position or price reductions, all those things are one-dimensional. If we can be a bit more dynamic and just help communicate those things with offers and holding that interest.
Would it be fair enough to say that doing auction holds you to the highest standard of real estate at all parts of the process? Doing auction holds you to the highest standards of real estate throughout every single part of the process, because the traditional element is just throwing it out there and seeing what happens, where this is a process in its own right that, again, runs you through a set measurement of things that need to happen. Yeah. I think that the one thing that I'm always conscious about this process is that the set date is wonderful from a leverage perspective and all of those different things, but that set date is also an accountability factor for the listing agent to have a result and to also have a truthful conversation with their seller.
But also for the seller, how many times has the seller put all this emphasis on, we'll see what happens on auction day, or auction day is going to bring me the result. And oftentimes it does, but that result sometimes surpasses their expectation, is their expectation, or is below their expectation. But that's the time that they have made their mind up that they're going to see their result. Yeah. So they're ready to accept that. So there's a lot of things there, Ben. And to your point there, I think that auction provides a blueprint for best practice in real estate.
Yep.
And with traditional, there is no blueprint. It's put a price on and go yourself. It's we're out there in the abyss kind of floating around. There's just no direction. There is no framework. Is one of my favorite terminologies. There is a framework to everything that I do, whether it's within my team, whether it's with a seller, whether it's with a listing agent, whether it's a buyer. There's a framework toward an outcome that I'm always working on, I'm always conscious of, and there's always a result there that we're looking to achieve. It's not guessing, it's not reacting, it's very proactive, it's very calculated. Nothing is by whim at all.
Yeah. And I think that the final cherry on top to this, guys, if you don't even like the concept of auction, just take the concept itself, remove the word auction, and it is the ideal methodology with the best proven track record to get a successful result in real estate. And it is just the transaction at that point. Jace, thanks for being on, mate. Good to have you back on the podcast, hey?
Yeah, always, mate. I'm sure it's good to have me back. I appreciate you.
See you, mate.
Bye.
So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.